Hello, my name's Lisa Harrison, and today I'm talking with Caleb Skinner, who, among other things, is one of the trustees for the One People's Public Trust. Hello, Caleb.
Hey, how are you today?
I am very well indeed.
Good.
I did hear one brief conversation that you had, an interview the other week, and I learned a little bit about your childhood.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So you grew up on a farm.
Yes.
Whereabouts?
So we had a 20-acre berry farm.
Oh, berry farm. Okay.
Till I was about, I want to say 12 or 13.
Mm-hmm.
We had that in the Willamette Valley, so West Coast, Oregon, halfway between Portland and Salem. I'm trying to, it's a beautiful little spot out here. Great soil. And my dad grew up in sort of an agricultural kind of scene, and my mom studied zoology, and my dad was kind of a hobby farmer.
Mm-hmm.
And so my brother and I ended up, all of us really, we got into purebred Suffolks. So we played the purebred sheep racket for a while.
Okay.
Which is like the purebred horse racket, except doesn't cost quite as much.
And you don't ride them, presumably.
But it's the same racket, My sheep is worth more than you because it's a direct descendant of this ram and all this other stuff. It was awesome. And then, of course, people would get in these weird breeding programs, and then sheep would naturally come out all mixed up because, the way people were breeding them.
Well, what do you do with these purebred sheep? Are they for eating, or are they for the wool? Or
we ate them; they were delicious.
Okay.
But we raised them all organic. But we had them for show. We didn't show them, so my parents wouldn't let us participate in 4-H because they considered that to be sort of a dishonest way of representing farming. So for those of you that aren't familiar with 4-H in America, it's where people get a pig or a beef or a sheep, and they win first prize at the fair, and then they go down to the auction yard and they sell it, and some company buys it for $5 a pound or $8 a pound, which is absurd in terms of real market value. So my parents wouldn't let us play that game, so we sold the sheep to the other families who let their kids do that.
Oh, okay.
And they won.
Now, you were homeschooled too, and that wow, I really admire your parents for seeing it through. I did it for about 3 years, and maybe it's different if you're in a more rural community, but when you're in the burbs, it's a little difficult because your kids really want to be out in amongst it, and that's why I ended up having to put mine into schools, just the more social, expanding their world kind of thing. But you did it all through high school?
Did it all through high school. And, really, when we moved to Madras, so I spent my high school years in Madras, it was a pretty small community. It's only like 3,000 people. They just put up their first, electric light when we moved there. And
you're
they
how
just
old?
didn't have oh, this was back in 90. I was what, 14, 15, 14, something like that. So it was maybe 90, 91.
Wow.
Something like that. Yeah, so it's getting a long time ago.
Sounds like an Amish community at this point.
It was just small, and it was, it's charming in its own way. And we had a 240-acre farm over there. My parents actually wanted us to put 1,000 brood ewes in confinement and then raise organic lamb. Use polypays this time instead of Suffolks, and you can get a polypay to average about 3 to 4 lambs per lambing. And you put a 12th of them in greenhouses, so you can control their ovulation cycles and get a 12th of them to lamb out every month. So you have a lamb factory. Anyway, it just didn't work. I didn't want to do it, and
well, how old were you at that point?
I was like, I don't know. We moved over there when I was probably 14, I think. 14 or 15. I wanted to be a cowboy because that was so much more romantic. So Anyway, yeah, my parents homeschooled us all the way through, and really what they did is they taught us how to learn. And once you teach someone how to learn, you just sort of get out of their way and let them do that.
Exactly, yes.
And because people ask like, what kind of curriculum did you use, or this, that, or the other, and my mom had some curriculum that she used, but looking back on the experience, they just taught us how to learn, and then they allowed us to learn. So, I mean, you could argue that the farm was one of my greatest learning experiences because my dad didn't really participate in running it. He was still writing software. So my brother and I ran the farm and everything that came along with that. I mean, we had got advice from my dad, but my dad just told us to go do stuff, and we'd go out and do stuff. And sometimes that meant breaking a lot of stuff and setting fields on fire and
and learning what not to do. Okay.
Yeah, I just figured it out.
So your dad was a programmer too?
Oh yeah, I'm second generation. So
Uh-huh.
So, it was a really valuable learning experience in that, there comes a point in time when you just have to go out and do stuff. And a lot of times it's not the right way, but a lot of times you don't have the luxury of doing it the right way. You kind of have to do what's now.
It sounds like you had, the few times that you and I have spoken and listening to that interview, what I've gotten about you is you've always been fiercely independent. You're highly intelligent. You're passionate. I think you were born in the wrong time. You should have been born in the midst of some revolution somewhere. And you have two essential passions from what I can gather. One is programming, coding, and music.
Kind of. I mean, there's other things I like to do, but that kind of sums it up. I mean, both of them are very creative and allow you to create almost indefinitely. And you can create and destroy these worlds kind of at your whim. And you sort of, it's like being an author of science fiction or any other fiction for that matter. You can create all your characters and they do what you want and away you go. Mm-hmm. And I mean, yeah, I really like that stuff. And, plus, music is a very beautiful thing. And once you've played on some big stages and had people scream at you for no reason, it's sort of a drug.
Well, they're screaming at you for a reason, presumably.
Not really. I mean, really? I mean, rock and roll, is it really that complicated? I mean, it's different if you're like a monster, player, but I don't know. I'm going to get myself in trouble with all the bands I like, so.
So when were you, it sounded like also you were introduced to how the world really works in terms of behind the veil, understanding the matrix at a young age as well.
Yeah, I used to listen to my dad have one-sided conversations with his friends when I was young, really young. And they were so fascinating to me at 9 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old. I'd sit and listen to just one side of it. He would talk with his friends about going in and buying up an entire small town and then, issuing their own currency. Because if you come out here to the West, it's sort of dying now compared to what it used to be, but there'd be entire towns that, it was just the sawmill. Mm. And my dad did a lot of work in sawmill automation. And so he and his friends would conjecture, well, what would we like if we bought the sawmill? And then we paid everybody in quid, or some form of currency that we decide to value. And then that forces the general store to accept it. Otherwise, we'll just build our own general store. And now that the general store accepts it, now the next thing has to accept it. And on down the line you go. Mm-hmm. It was really interesting. It was an interesting discussion in if a small group of people get together and they say, we're going to do this. Now, my dad talked about a lot of things he never did. So he never did that, which was unfortunate because that had been a wonderful sort of experiment. But my parents just sort of taught me to question everything. And sort of, you can question in a good way. I'm always fascinated by small children, especially ones that just learn to talk and say why.
Yeah.
Because I always think there's tremendous wisdom in that. Mm-hmm. And, of course, I'm not a parent. I don't have kids, so I'm not the one that gets frustrated by constantly explaining everything to a 3-year-old. But,
I've done the same thing with mine. I encourage them to question. The downside of that is they question you
right.
often in such a way that is not, not necessarily polite.
Well, and you're human or whatever, so you get frustrated with that experience. But there is tremendous wisdom in asking the question why, and asking it over and over and over and over and over again.
Mm.
And why this, why that? There's this really common thread that children say they see ghosts until we tell them that they don't exist long enough, and then they suddenly don't see them anymore. And I'm especially fascinated by Ender's Game. It's a science fiction work. I won't ruin it, but it's a brilliant writing on the power of a child or children in a group, and perception. And anyway, so my parents just always encouraged me to question, and go figure it out. And the farm, the big farm or the bigger farm in Madras was sort of a grand experiment in that. And a lot of times my dad would just tell me to go solve something, and I would. And a lot of times I didn't do it the right way. I probably cost my dad a lot of money. We had some funny conversations years later, because I'd always go down. I'd break something. I didn't go and tell him I broke it. I'd just go down to the John Deere dealership and get the appropriate kit to rebuild it, and come back home and fix it. And he told me years later, he's like, yeah, they'd call down to the house and say, your kid's in here again buying stuff. Should we sell it to him this time? And he'd always say yes. And, I'd go home and rebuild whatever hydraulic cylinder I blew up or disc blade I smashed or whatever I did.
So when did you really start digging down the rabbit hole of say, the banking or whatever rabbit hole you went down first?
Well, I used to study warfare and how people move troops, and marches and positioning and generals and how wars were won, and that was really fascinating to me. And then I began to wonder why wars were fought in the first place, and that became this very intriguing discussion. Like, how does a handful of men get together and decide that we have such great disagreement, and the only way that we can resolve this is to go forth to the population centers that we represent and say, I need all of your young men to go sign up and go die over here. Like, that became a very intriguing question to me.
It's a very, very good question.
Like, how is it that two men, or maybe two small groups of men, can get together and have a disagreement that causes towns in London, in England, in World War I, to lose all their male population between 18 or 17 and 35. I mean, I don't know if you studied trench warfare in World War I, but that's what would happen. I mean, it was horrible. It was the worst. It's so atrocious, so utterly senseless. And when you study the roots of World War I, it sounds like everyone is just going to go off and have a little tiff. Like, we're going to go out behind the school and push each other around and be back by fall. Yeah. And it turns into this horrible slog fest. I mean, I just can't really describe. I couldn't imagine, being in a trench and charging a machine gun nest through barbed wire and through shell fire, knowing that the last people that did that yesterday all died. None of them came back, and the people that did it a week ago all died and didn't come back. And yet you're supposed to do this for country? Like,
yep.
So
just get up out of the trench, go up over that wall, and be shot at the top.
Be shot at the top. And this has value. The fact that we lose 1 million men or something in some of those battles, it was insane, has value. Like, where's the value here? What are we really arguing about? And that really was very profound to me. I just didn't understand. I was trying to grasp, why is it that these people all need to die? And this is horrific, I mean, the Civil War was horrific. I mean, warfare got, in my opinion, especially horrific when we introduced the rifle, because then you could sort of have a very untrained resource, take a gun and shoot someone else with it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even personal. It wasn't even like this person was 3 feet away from you with a sword and you were forced to come to the grips that you were killing this thing, this person, this entity. It was very sort of abstract now.
And even more so now.
Detached, horribly detached now. You didn't have to beat your plowshare into something. You just grabbed this gun and went off and shot somebody and didn't really think about it. Now we have drones, which are horrible. Because again,
they're just like playing a computer game.
Exactly. We're making it too abstract, too detached. It has no meaning, and it needs to. This is something of immense value here.
So where did this research lead to?
So this research led me to money. Money
Yes.
and religion. And I tried to find a war that was fought over religion for a while. And that became very difficult because I found that most wars that were... I hesitate to use the word all because I don't know everything. And I haven't studied every crack and crevice of history. But most wars that I could find that were supposedly fought over religion weren't really fought over religion. They were spurred on by religion to achieve a primary purpose. For example, I believe the Crusades were fought because the church was tired of the nobles beating on each other. And so they decided just to take all of that male energy and go beat on someone else, which is really unfortunate. But it wasn't fought really over religion. It was fought over money. The nobles would war with each other so that they could expand their territories.
Yeah.
And so, which is essentially, they're trying to expand their power, their prestige, their money.
Their empires.
Their empires, exactly. And so how they would do that is they'd go take some from somebody else. And so when you look at, especially World War I, World War II, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, all of these wars are essentially fought over money. We don't want to pay your taxes. Why do we get taxed twice as much as these people over here? It's a huge issue in the war for independence from the UK, from England. World War I and World War II were fought to bail out European banks. It just is what it is. And it's sad, it's horrible. Vietnam, same racket. You have the admiral who was present at the Gulf of Tonkin now coming out and saying the whole thing was a setup.
Yes.
And it's not like we didn't know that years ago. But this is coming right out of the horse's mouth. So when you look at all this stuff and say, why are we fighting over money? Like, what is it about money? Because I don't believe money's bad. It just is. It's a representation. Why are we doing this? And then, so that led me to this whole understanding that it gets fractionalized and monetized, and then when we do all of this fractionalization and monetization, it allows whoever's in control of that to have tremendous power in relation to everyone else.
Absolutely.
And so when I saw that, I said, "Aha! This is wrong. This is." I really struggle with the idea of right and wrong because I believe that so often in life we're too quick to slap on titles of right and wrong. But there are some things that are right and there are some things that are wrong. And stealing other people's labor is wrong. And creating something out of thin air and pinning the obligation of that creation upon myself and my children and grandchildren is wrong. Mm-hmm. How you choose to live your life and what you want to snort up your nose and, if you want to snowboard down a mountain and break your neck or whatever, those are all your choices. And we should not speak about those things. Those are neither right nor wrong. That's for you to live and you to reconcile with God or Source or Allah or whoever you see in the cosmos. But stealing is wrong. Taking someone else's energy without their consent is wrong. Forcing contracts upon people and intentionally setting out to deceive people is wrong. Using your intelligence that is given to you by creation to deceive other parties who may not be given the same gift that you have is incredibly wrong. Like, it's horrible. Like, conducting a business deal because the other party isn't as smart as you and gaining value off of that, to me, is horribly wrong. Like, it's just bad. I won't do that. Like, I have a software shop, and, everyone should be able to draw on their whiteboard what you're creating and why. Everyone should have knowledge. They may not know how to write the code, but they should have the ability to explain the solution. So anyway,
Did you end up going down all those, known and unknown sovereign strawman?
I went down all of them.
All of them. Okay.
I mean, not all of them, but I went down enough of them to figure out, like, I did the whole, in the States, the 16th Amendment, where it wasn't properly ratified. I have a box in my garage that has the official results from all the states. And then I read a court case sometime in the 30s where the Supreme Court came out and said that the 16th Amendment didn't grant the federal government any new powers. And so that really was a head scratcher for me. And so basically, I began to realize I didn't have any constitutional rights because I'm not a party to it.
Yep.
And if I'm not a party to the Constitution, where do my rights come from? Well, my rights come from God. The Founding Fathers alluded to that when they said they're immutable. Unalienable. And so I went down all these roads and came to the understanding that sheets of paper don't save you. Your president doesn't save you. Your mayor doesn't save you. Your police chief doesn't save you. None of these things save you. What saves you is an understanding of who you are and knowing who you are and standing firm in that space and being okay with the consequences of that decision.
Who did you decide you are?
I'm aware. I am who I am. I know that sounds vague, but I grew up in the Christian persuasion. And it says in Genesis, they ate from the tree of evil and they became like us, knowing good from evil. So I am not entrapped in anyone's perception of me. I am who Source has created me to be. And I don't need to wait to be 70 years old to gain a piece of knowledge. I don't need to wait to be 40 to gain a piece of knowledge or experience something. Time is holistic. I can have that experience right now.
So did you come to the conclusion that there was no, well, I guess remedy is often the word used, down any of those particular rabbit holes?
There's no magic bullets. There's no, well, I'm going to file this sheet of paper and this is going to protect me from everything.
No.
And that was sort of what I pursued. Like I would go, fly to conferences and buy, such and such a speaker. I'd buy all their DVDs. I'd buy all their books and listen to them and read them. And I always came back around to, that just didn't resonate with me. And the further I got into it, the more jaded I became. Because somebody would come up with their latest theory or whatever, or latest program, right? You're supposed to sign up for this thing, and there's supposed to be some prosperity program. And when I started my consulting and decided to never be an employee again, there were some years, there was like 3 years that I went, I guess, paycheck to paycheck. I didn't have any money in the bank. I didn't even know what a bank account, savings account was. And I would sign up for every little prosperity program, everything that was supposed to be my ticket out. And then I began to realize that all those things were doing was providing me hope. They weren't providing me solution. And I began to realize that what was getting me from week to week wasn't someone's prosperity program. It wasn't reading a book, or it wasn't, surfing the web and reading about this thing that's going to happen, or this currency that's going to revalue, or this figure. It was me. Somehow I was scratching my way through what I needed to learn over that 3-year period. And when I got done with that 3-year period, I still had some other lessons, obviously, I had to learn, because we all do, but I really realized that I got through it because I did it. No one helped me. No one showed up with a big check. I had to go find work and scratch around and, bumble around and do all the stupid things you do when you first start a business because you don't know what you're doing. Lose money and all that fun stuff. But I learned that I was the one that did it. And granted, I had people help me, but ultimately it was me that did the body of work.
Yeah.
And so I sort of started to apply that to this whole whatever process this is. and really began to realize that, Jim over here, who's doing a great thing, can't stand for me. I have to stand for me. Susie over here, who's doing a fantastic work in whatever she's pursuing and whatever truth that she's found, can't stand for me either. She can only stand for herself. And so when I began to realize that I have to stand, and in that moment of standing, everything in the universe has to respect that I've become aware. And I believe that that's what destroys ultimately the machine, is when people stand and they realize that I don't have to give my energy away. And it's more important than not just giving my energy away. It's the idea that I don't have to have anyone else's permission to do anything. Like, I don't have a high school diploma. I don't have a college degree. And it used to really bother me because I needed the validation from that sheet of paper. And now I look at life and say, of course, I had to go steady for a while to get my swagger. But I looked at the Wright brothers, and these guys were a couple bicycle mechanics that learned how to fly. And they didn't have the amazing college education and the appropriate prep school and money backing them and all of this. They just had a dream. And they wouldn't let anyone tell them that their dream was wrong or invalid or that couldn't be achieved. So they went off and did it. I like to think of them as, maybe one day I'll run into them and they'll smack me upside the head, but I like to think of them as too dumb to know that they might fail.
Yeah.
They just had this tenacity of, we're going to run this bicycle shop, and in our free time, we're going to learn how to fly. I mean, really think about that for a minute. I mean, it's hard enough to have a day gig and then do another gig on top of that, whether it's just another 8-hour shift or it's, you're heavily involved in your community or whatever. They have a day gig that has to support them. And then on top of that, they're trying to do something that no one else has ever done before. And I'm guessing they faced an enormous amount of, people probably mocking them.
And every cent they earned from their bike shop went into
right.
Materials
and labor, and they probably turned down some work, so they could go up to Kitty Hawk and try to figure out how to make this thing go. And as I, researched history and researched figures in history, I kept finding this reoccurring theme of people who were successful that really didn't have any right to be successful in terms of sheets of paper or the right credentials or the right pedigree or the right schooling. They just kind of said, well, I'm going to go do this. So off they went. And that was very important to me because it sort of taught me that I don't need permission from you. I don't need permission from a university. I don't need permission from my neighbor or my parents to go try to do something. Because what if I'm right? It's mine. Maybe I don't need all of your credentials to go try to do this thing. How did we first discover? I mean, you want a fascinating story is how we figured out how to create fiber optics. Some guys just went off and figured out how to play with hot glass until they made fiber optics. I mean, it's really interesting. And we have to become bold enough and emboldened in our life to realize that that the truth is out there. We may not like it. We may not like doing what it requires of us, but it's there. And I like to, when I was learning to program, not when I was learning, when I was really, you go through this thing where you're always terrified about what you're doing, at least I do, until you get enough of a grasp on it. And you're like, okay, I get this. I understand how it works now. And I used to eat sunflower seeds. I'd go down to the local store here. I'd walk down and I'd grab some sunflower seeds, like a reasonably sized large bag, and I'd eat them when I'd run into a problem I couldn't solve. And years later, I realized the reason I was eating sunflower seeds was because if you understand your conscious mind versus I believe it's your subconscious mind, your conscious mind can only make about 8 decisions a second. And I believe your subconscious mind can make magnitudes higher, billions or something ridiculous. So I began to believe that everything that we know we know when we're born. And that what we actually do is we go through life and get dumbed down and get told we don't know anything.
Yep.
And then once we get dumbed down thoroughly and told we don't know anything, we accept it. And then we're good little robots. We're good little worker bees. And so by eating the sunflower seeds, it tied up my conscious mind and gave it something to do, because it had to like organize the seed in my mouth and hold it and crack it, and then my subconscious mind would solve the computer problem.
Interesting.
Because I quit trying to think my way through everything. Because you can't. I mean, you can try.
So at what point in your journey do you come into contact with Randall and Heather?
I came into contact with them about 2.5 years ago.
And where were you at that point? What were you doing?
And writing code, extremely suspicious of everything, everyone. I'd kind of had my fill of all the various movements, if you will. You know, file this sheet of paper. These are your freedom docs. File this there. File this over here. I just said, you know, a sheet of paper is not going to protect you from anything. It's just a sheet of paper. You know, if bad men are going to do bad things, they're going to do it whether or not you have a sheet of paper. That was kind of my attitude at the time. So I ran into Heather. I had a buddy of mine who was really good at networking, and he met her. And I ran into Heather and was sort of suspicious. I'm very suspicious of anyone who says things like, I've been in bank, trade, and finance, and I've done all these deals, and this and that and the other, because how do you validate? It's like when someone says they work for the CIA. You're like, fantastic. You know, story I can't validate. Because if you actually did work for the CIA, it should be impossible for me to determine that you did. And if I can figure out that you work for the CIA, you probably weren't a very valuable asset. Unless you get involved in hacking and stuff like that. But even then, all the backstories and covers and everything else, I mean, those people are supposed to be really, really hard to figure out who they are. So Heather came along and said, you know, I'm in bank, trade, and finance, and I've done this deal and that deal and worked on this deal and over here and over there. You know, I'm very suspicious because we've all met a couple of those people, and usually they don't pan out. You know, usually they're busy selling you a bridge, you know, in a desert somewhere. And, you know, they hit you with all these credentials, and it's too good to be true. And then you think to yourself, well, maybe this is Providence. I'll just have to go along with this. But anyway, I'd already been sold that bridge in the desert. So I was very suspicious. So I was aware of Heather, and I told my friend, that's fantastic. You know, you go do that thing with Heather that you guys are working on or whatever, and I'm going to stand over here on the sidelines. Because we all have heard the people that talk about offshore platforms and monetization and doing deals, and you need to get your platform going. And so keep in mind, at this point in time in my life, I was getting ready to be done with everything that was system. Because for the longest time, I was just like, fantastic. I'll just figure out how to monetize all this. I'll set up my own trading platform. I'll do this. I'll learn how to participate in arbitrage. I'll write a piece of software that does, you know, currency trading. And at that point in time, I had started to backpedal away from all of that and say, I don't want anything to do with that system because it's not honorable. You know, there's nothing, you know, even if you have knowledge that allows you to do something, that's not an excuse to go do it. You still have to step back and ponder and say, is this a good thing to do? Is this honorable? Is this, I mean, just because you understand exchanges and can take advantage of somebody because of that, should you? And that's a you know.
Well, my example for that is just because you know how to make an atomic bomb doesn't necessarily mean you should.
But absolutely encompasses what I'm trying to say. And so at that point in time, I said, I don't want anything to do with any of this. You know, if you're setting up a currency platform, if you're trying to A for B or monetize your birth certificate, or you're trying to all this other stuff, I don't want any of that. What I want is I want to be left alone. I want to write some code, play some music, you know, do some surfing or whatever, and I want my labor exchanges to be honored, and I don't want anybody vampiring off of my energy. And so I sat and watched Heather And I didn't watch her that closely, but I was aware of her. But
When you say watched her, you're talking about what she calls the investigation period.
right, I didn't even watch her that closely. I mean, I got the Paradigm Report and read it and said, "Great, where does this go?" So anyway, Heather and I got involved in the trust, and then we went on a trip to Europe to serve slavery papers on the Rothschilds. And that's when I got to know Heather pretty well. And that's when I really was like, pretty legit. Like, if she wanted to, at any point in time in Heather's existence, she could have branched off and joined the machine and, been a part of the construct that's just busy stealing labor off of all these exchanges, or representation of labor. And she never did. And so that, that held a lot of ground with me because, as we go through our process of awakening and becoming aware, we all look back at our past and say, oh, geez, there's a bunch of things I wish I wouldn't have done. Or if I could go back, I wouldn't have done that. And Heather alludes to some of that, talking DA and stuff like that. But that was her path, and she was remorseful about that stuff. Not that it matters. I mean, but it was interesting to spend, 7 days with her and all of our crazy adventures with the Rothschilds and all that stuff. And kind of
Did you get to them? Were you able to serve the papers?
Oh yeah, we served it on the Rothschild family in London. I think it's on Crown Street or whatever, I forget. And they got all in a tizzy about that, and we hopped on a plane and I flew over to Zurich and served it on the Rothschild family over there. And, spoke with their house counsel very briefly, and then came back in 72 hours and spoke with their house counsel again, and they didn't refute the claim.
Just to bring people up to speed, what was the claim?
Slavery. So, because the Federal Reserve is private, as I'm sure we all know now. Mm-hmm. So, if you're creating money out of thin air and pinning the obligation on myself and my grandchildren to pay that obligation, but yet receiving all of the value for it, that's slavery.
So their response was just to jump up and down a little bit and make some noise, but they couldn't refute it.
The response was no response. That's what he came out and said. He actually came out and said, our response is no response.
Who's he?
The house counsel for the Rothschilds.
Okay.
So anyway, we had all sorts of good times. We ran into an agent and then had people snooping around our hotel they had work vans that we'd Google the name on, and it wouldn't show up in Switzerland. And so, they were running around. We were staying in this old hotel in the medieval district, and there was all these sewers that were no longer from 1,000 years ago or whatever. And I guess they would go down there and find lights turned on and stuff moved around, and people shouldn't have been there. And we told the hotel just to call the police. And anyway, it was an interesting trip. Things to.
So what made you decide to be a part of that?
I called Heather one night, and I was tired of writing software all the time. I said, I want to go jump out of an airplane. Because this individual, her mentor, Carl, I won't mention his last name because I should ask him for permission first. But
mentor in what sense?
Bank, trade, and finance mentor.
Okay.
There's this figure called the old man that everyone in bank, trade, and finance refers to as the old man. Supposedly lives somewhere in China at high altitude, and no one gets to go see him. Carl apparently did when he was young. So I called Heather one night and said I'd love to go see the old man. Because when people say stuff to me like, this thing exists and this and that and the other, I say, perfect. I'd like to go meet that entity. Because you told me they exist, and now you just need to go tell me where to meet them at, and I'll go do that. So I said, and the problem was, I guess to meet the old man, you had to jump out of an airplane. And then they on the ground with machine guns and all this other stuff.
This is the old Asian man who's supposed to be, hundreds and hundreds, if not nearly 1,000 years old. Is this the one?
This is who I believe it is. I don't know. People have always referred to me, to this individual as the old man. Mm-hmm. So naturally, I want to meet the old man, because why not?
Sure.
You know, like you said, there's a possibility for me to meet the old man. So I had we were chatting one night, having a brief phone call, and I said, well, if you ever need anybody to jump out of an airplane to meet the old man, I'm happy to do that. You know,
Did you think he'd take you up on it?
That's how I ended up in Europe.
Okay, so you didn't meet the old man, but you did go and visit the Rothschilds.
Yeah, I'd still like to meet the old man if he's really there. People say he is, but you know, I'm kind of a doubting Thomas. So, you know, if I haven't had a chance to meet him yet, so and I'd be happy to. I also don't need to. So,
When you made that offer, she said, "Well, how would you like to come to Europe with me instead?"
something along those lines. I don't remember the exact how we digress from jumping on an airplane to meet the old man to slavery claims on the Rothschilds, but
Did you know what you were getting yourself in for?
I never know what I'm getting myself in for.
And what happened after? So what happens after that? You come back to the States after strange vans following you around Switzerland, and then what?
Came back to the States, you know, and things just sort of proceeded along. And we began to realize that really all of this is about speaking their language and filing something into their system. So basically what you're trying to do is the way that I see all of this is you're trying to communicate with them for the highest good of all, including their good. Because they are people too. And they're our brothers and sisters too. And so it was important to reach out to them. This is looking back, okay? In the moment, I was ready to raise an army, kick down the doors, put heads on pikes.
I told you were born in the wrong time.
Yeah, I was ready to get down and get busy, you know. And then through this whole process, I began to really realize this is about speaking to them in a language that they can understand. And the language that they understand is commerce. And we have to speak to them in such a way that they can no longer say, I didn't hear you. And so this whole process of going through the UCC has been about speaking to them in their language. And that's why when people read the filings, they're confused by them. Mm. And I don't fault them for that. Like, that's understandable to be confused by them. That's like listening to certain forms of jazz and not really grasping what it's about. Because there was a period in jazz where it stopped being about communicating emotion and became about, well, I'm going to play a 12-tone row, or I'm only going to use these extensions, or I'm only going to play this many notes against this many bars, or whatever. And it wasn't so much about the emotional expression, it was about the technical expression. So those documents, you know, again, this is Heather, right? You know, a beautifully created entity created for this moment in time, or brought forth for this moment in time, as she penned these fantastic words in their language that they can understand and that are very clear and very concise and for the most part very short. Like, these aren't 50-page documents. These aren't 100-page documents. The intent and the energy and the accuracy is all bundled up into these nicely defined and nicely shaped paragraphs of goodness. And off it goes, and never refuted. And that's why I say that, you know, it's important to speak the high language to them. It still doesn't matter in the sense that your energy is yours, and no one can take it from you without your consent. And I will always stand by. It doesn't matter how that is said. It is truth. I'm really trying to avoid using the word divine here, but it is okay, we'll use the word absolute. It is absolute truth. That your energy is yours and can never be taken from you without your consent. And to do such as the most egregious of offenses, in my opinion. And I hope in a lot of other people's opinions. And so anyway, Heather writes these beautiful documents, and of course we review them, and that's when Heather and I didn't argue as much. We have a great relationship. We just we butt heads and aren't afraid to. And so, we just went down this whole path, and then it became sort of apparent that it just wasn't this idea of the public trust. It wasn't this idea of the United States or only doing something for the United States. This was a global issue. And Heather will go as far to say this is a universal idea, that spans the universe and the dimensions thereof. I'm always very hesitant to make big claims like universal or all dimensions. But looking back on it, because we would always, every time that she would expand the scope, I would have a lot of resistance to that, because I don't want anyone telling me what to do. And so every time you expand the scope of something, I'm very concerned about authoritarian powers or speaking on behalf of someone else or all that stuff, because I don't want anyone speaking on my behalf. When I'm playing my piano, I don't want you to come along and banging on the upper register. That'd be annoying. Don't do that. So I don't want to come along and bang on your upper register on your piano. I want you to have your experience. And so, as I began to sort of really see it from where she was coming from, it's really true, because really what has to happen is someone has to stand up in all of these dimensions and all of these universes and all of these constructs and say what was said. And that is, you can't steal other people's energy without their consent. Where's the contract?
And their option at that point was to either show that they have one.
Right.
Or shut up and allow it to be registered as law, that they can't do that anymore.
Right. And that's why the scope kept getting, that's why this language of the eternal heart and universes and dimensions and all of these things began to come into play. Because why not bring freedom to all of them? Right? Why only bring freedom to a small segment? Why not bring freedom to everything? And it's not like that freedom wasn't already there. It was. But what was had to be voiced in a way that the powers that were, or the entities that were in place, could hear it. And again, it goes back to this idea of operating for the highest good of all, in that you operate in grace and you operate in a place of sort of in thanksgiving, right? So you bring your best foot forward and say, I'm going to bring no assumptions with me. I'm just going to make this statement, and I'm going to forget everything that's happened in the past. I'm not going to hold you responsible for your shortcomings. I'm going to set those aside and say that you made those decisions out of a place of lack of knowledge. Because if we're going to start judging people for the mistakes that they made in the past, then ultimately we have to judge ourselves for allowing those people to infringe upon us. Because remember, everything about that old system gathers energy when we allow it to happen.
Absolutely.
Right? So by judging them, ultimately we judge ourselves. So anything that we put onto them, we have to put onto us. And that was a really, really hard thing for me to understand. Because I wanted to...
You wanted heads on pikes.
Put some heads on some pikes, French Revolution style, and get this ball rolling. And I began to realize that, well, the only way I could do that is if I stuck my head on a pike right next to theirs. And I didn't really like that idea. But I couldn't think my way out of it. I couldn't come up with a position that allowed me anything other than absolute responsibility for what had occurred. Because I can't take complete, absolute responsibility for my own life and then come over here and not take responsibility for this little segment over here that's kind of dark and dirty and ugly. I have to take responsibility for all of it.
All of it, yeah.
Right? So I can't parcel it up. I can't say look at me over here and not look at me over here. This is where I'm nice and shiny and pretty, so we'll keep that section. And this is where I'm ugly and dark and sort of deficient, so we'll like scrub that off the record.
We'll just turn a blind eye to that one.
Blindness, which is a fantastic read. Anyway, so I began to realize that we really have to realize that this is all of our problems, and the problem that we're encountering is because we gave it permission to happen. And so once I had figured that out, I got off my high horse that we were going back to constitutional government, that we were going back to something in history, and I realized that we were moving forward. And the moment I realized we were moving forward, it was like a switch went off and I calmed down. Like I'm sure Heather and Randall can pinpoint that day. Because I calmed down a lot. Because I realized that the reason there's all of this, what's a good word for this? I wouldn't say discord, but lack of organization or what appears to be lack of momentum is because something like this has never happened before. Usually it goes, you have my stuff. Yeah, I have your stuff. Give me my stuff back. I don't want to give your stuff back. Okay, here comes my army. I'm going to get my stuff back. Right? And you smash each other up for a while and maybe you get your stuff back, maybe you don't. But it's never occurred to someone to say, you have my stuff. I'd like it back. And if you don't give it back to me, I'm going to move past you and it, and the universe will deal with you. Like, think about that for a minute. It's a really sort of powerful position to be in when you say to yourself, to your surroundings, you've stolen from me, but I allowed it. So instead of responding how we've always responded, which is to get out a big stick and beat on each other, I'm going to just say, your theft is just as much my fault as it is yours. So I'm going to clear the table, and I'm going to move forward with my affairs. And if you don't do the right thing, the universe is going to deal with you. Like, to me, that's a very powerful position to take.
It is, but it sounds like it's one that's built on faith. Faith.
It is.
On nothing tangible for some people.
And I agree with that. I'm not discounting it, but I know that if I stop giving you my energy, you don't have anything to stand on. And so what it does for me is now I don't have to hunt you down, and I prefer not to hunt anyone down. And I absolutely agree that there's an element of the unknown, but the reality of it is I have to take responsibility for that which I have done.
When did Randall come into the picture for you?
Randall came in the picture for me about the same time Heather did, a little after, maybe 6 months after the fact. Randall's is really great. He's been around the block a time or two. He surfs and lives in Hawaii, and he's very much about living in the present, which I really appreciate. And he's it's very calm demeanor, and is a very good balance for Heather and I. He's been on this road for probably 30, 40 years, I would imagine.
And when did the light bulb go off that the UCC was the right repository for these documents?
For me, I'd have to say probably about the time that, before we headed to Europe with the slavery claim, because that was filed into the UCC. Mm-hmm. But it just became apparent to me that you basically need a registration board of some kind that everyone has agreed upon. And that to me is the UCC. So the countries have all come together and said, this is how we will conduct our affairs, by this set of rules.
So for those listening who aren't up to speed with the One People's Public Trust, what do you see as the result of all of those filings?
Well, what I see as a result of all of those filings is that the powers that were, as Heather calls them, have been noticed. Hey, you can't do this anymore. And so now it just turns into essentially a giant house of cards. And of course, there's going to be pockets inside that house of cards that want to resist and want to continue to abuse their situation, if you will. But there's going to be, in my opinion, a lot of people that are just happy to be done with it. But the ultimate responsibility is upon the people to say, I will not be your slave anymore. And you've been noticed. Your system is defunct. It is broke. You're just a corporation. You have no contract with me that I am aware of. If I do have a contract with you that I am unaware of, please bring that forth so that we can properly deal with that. Because this whole thing is about permission from the people. Because every government that's ever been birthed gets its permission to operate from the people. They may not realize it, but that's the reality of the situation. And so, there's 300 million people in the United States. What percentage of them are government? And of the percentage of them that are government or purported government or corporation or whatever you want to call it, what percentage of them are corrupt? Probably a really small percent. But because we get all caught up in just doing our jobs, or it's my job, or we don't know any better, we don't see it in a different light, we just continue on with this play that's sort of unfolding in front of us. And we never stop and say no. And there are opportunities all around us to educate. And so we have to use those opportunities to educate our public servants and not to demean them, our purported public servants. And, at any point in time, you can just set up your own form of government if you want. You have the right to self-governance. That's one of your rights. I always tell people I reserve all my rights. All the rights I can think of and all the rights that I can't think of. I reserve all.
So what do you see as next? How do you see, the people of the planet taking hold of this and allowing it to transform and unfold?
Well, I personally, obviously, it's my opinion, personal opinion, because it's all the same, but I see sort of a couple different paths. Part of me says it's like the 100 monkey syndrome, where you see a bit of activity over here one day, and then the next day you see a bit more activity, and then the next day it's suddenly spread from that one jurisdiction to the 3 surrounding it, and a couple days after that it's across that entire geography, and a couple days after that it's across that entire continent, where people just wake up to this idea. Or I see people that are more aggressive, less patient, if you will, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I see them just forming their own governments. You have the right to self-governance. So, I see, you see all these, in the States, you have all these patriot movements. Well, get together and delegate some authority to some representatives. Let them work on your behalf. We know that the corporation isn't working on your behalf. So go appoint your own sheriff. There's nothing wrong with that.
Do you think we need it? Do you think we need to be governed even? No?
I don't think so at all. No. I don't like the idea of appointed governments. I have yet to see one that works. And
it seems to me whenever a system like that is created, hierarchy forms and therefore corruption.
Well, right, and the biggest issue is that humanity tends to be lazy, and so you put a system in place that serves you, and it's ideal, and it gives you benefit. And so because it's giving you benefit, you're satisfied. And then that system starts to find ways to, well, I'll just take a little from over here. I'll take a little piece from here. I'll take a little piece from there. And because you're busy enjoying your life and running your affairs and being active in your community and growing a business or whatever it is that you want to do, surfing, you think to yourself, well, really, they're only stealing half an hour of my labor a week. They're stealing 10 minutes of my labor a week. Do I really care about 10 minutes of my labor? Do I care about 20 minutes of my labor that they're stealing every week? And, most of us, including me, say, I don't really care. I'm too busy enjoying the fruits of my labor or surfing or whatever it is. And so, over time, this monstrosity gets created. And I'm just, I'm probably way overcompensating, but it's like Dune, and I think it's the Butler Hin Jihad, when they destroy all the thinking machines, they pass this universal law that says you can't have thinking machines anymore. Like, computers can't be utilized at all. So that's how they dealt with it. And that's probably a bit of an extreme to destroy the whole thing. But my position is, why can't we all just be honorable? Sign a contract, and this is how I'm going to conduct my affairs. And if I damage you, I'm responsible to take care of that. It's not a complicated construct to imagine. If I'm driving down a road that you built, I should pay you a toll. If I'm driving across a bridge that you built, I should pay you a toll. If I'm eating food that you grew, I should pay you for it. If I'm using your intellectual capacity to fly my car instead of drive it, I should pay you for it. I don't see those things as difficult things to grasp. And essentially where we need law, as I see it, is to protect us from people who choose not to live honorably. And then this whole legal thing gets created, and suddenly we have statutes and codes instead of laws, and suddenly we just have systems that take advantage of the statutes and codes instead of just dealing with the underlying issue. And, I don't see why we need to avoid the underlying issue. I'm not afraid of meeting something head on and dealing with it.
Well, how do you deal with the One People's Public Trust and Heather in particular have been perceived as very 5D, is the general description. Where do you sit with that aspect of it?
Well, there was a philosopher way back in the day, maybe 15th century, that said, we will take Earth and we will strap her to the rack and we will extort from her secrets.
Wow.
And we have become a culture, a society, if you will, that only knows how to respond to our five senses. And if it doesn't come from our five senses, we're unwilling to deal with it. And so if you look at the purges that the Catholic Church enacted when they were busy on their witch hunts, they were busy killing everyone that exhibited tendencies outside of the five senses. Mm-hmm. And so I agree that with that criticism that there's some of that, if you will call it 5D, going on here.
Oh, it's not always said as a criticism. For some it is, but for others it's embraced.
Well, sure. Yeah, I mean, however you want to view it. I'm willing to agree with those that are willing to say, hey, this is a criticism. But I guess where I come from is that I'm really interested in the idea of the subconscious mind. I'm really interested in how on earth did Beethoven and Mozart write those magnificent pieces of music at such a young age? What were they tapping into? How did that work? And when I review these edge cases, if you will, I believe what I'm finding is people that operated transparently inside some other dimension. And my dad was good friends with Lynn Buchanan, who was a remote viewer. What did he do? He recorded all of the data from the remote viewing sessions at whatever military base did the remote viewing with whoever it was that just passed on.
Yes, I've got his book. Not Ed Dames, the other one.
Ed Dames is crazy, but what was the guy that came up with the remote viewing thing that I forget? He just passed on.
Yeah, no, I've got his book. I've completely gone blank on his name.
Yeah, so have I. But he my dad, spent a bunch of time with him, and then even in my grandpa was in World War II in Italy in front lines doing his thing, and he told me stories about one day he pitched his tent and just didn't feel right about sleeping in it, so he threw out his bedroll kind of next to his tent. And his buddy came along and said, "Hey, Roy, you're not sleeping in your tent tonight?" My grandpa said, "No." And he said, "Well, I won't pitch mine then. I'll just sleep in yours." And my grandpa said, "You go right ahead." So the guy goes in there, throws out his bedroll, lays on it, and sets off a landmine. Killed him.
Oh.
And then another time, my grandpa was out on patrol. And I forget the exact details of why this is, but for whatever reason, in his little 8-man patrol, I believe, he was marching in spot number 7. And for whatever reason, the Germans like to shoot, the snipers like to shoot the guys that were number 7 in line. So on this particular day, my grandpa decided not to march number 7th in line because he just didn't feel right about it. So they go out on their little patrol, and sure enough, guy number 7 gets shot, got shot dead. Boom, done. And for whatever reason, it wasn't my grandpa. Anyway, my grandpa came home from the war and began a career as a watch repairman. And one day they had a station wagon, and one day he had to go pick up my grandma from the airport. So before he went to the airport to pick up my grandma, he pulled out about 12 clocks that were in the back of the station wagon. There were client clocks, and they had to get repaired. So he brings grandma back from the airport, and then grandma takes a car and promptly drives it up a tree. And my dad asked him, "Well, Grandpa, why did you take the clocks out of the car?" And he said, "Well, I knew Grandma was going to wreck the car, so I took the clocks out because I didn't want the clocks getting smashed." Of course, my dad said, "Well, why did you give her the keys in the first place?" But the point I'm driving at here is...
Grandma was okay, I take it.
Grandpa was fine. He wasn't in the car. The point I'm driving at here... Grandma. Right. In this short experience of getting to know my grandpa, I see all of these events that happen that have nothing to do with the 5 senses, where he's using his intuition or something is alerting him. Somehow these events are taking place. Somehow remote viewers are able to go out and come back with incredibly accurate information about things that happened a long time ago. Or, before they sent the Voyager probe out, they sent remote viewers out around planets, and they'd come back and tell them how many moons were supposed to be there. And they were right. The Voyager probe confirmed them. So there is an entire, I don't want to call it just a universe, but there's an entire something out there that we are not taught about or we are intentionally misled about. I liken it to writing programming and writing software. I know how to write software, pretty good at it. You may not know anything about it, but does your lack of understanding how to do it negate its existence?
Not at all.
I don't think it does. And so there is a whole bunch of energy, of knowledge, of experience, of something, of res running around in the universe that we don't go out and latch onto. And I'm really curious as to what that is. And when I read books like The Holographic Universe that talk about, various nuns that don't eat, and they have doctors go out there and monitor them, and sure enough, they haven't eaten for 20 years, and their bodies are just fine. What are those nuns tapping into? How about the people that what's it called? Stigmata, when they manifest the wounds of Christ, and it doesn't matter how they're positioned, the blood always flows down their foot, even if their foot is in the air above their head. How does that work? How do we explain these things? These things are mysteries to me on one sense, and I think the reason they are is because we're trying to explain it in I hate to use the word, but a 3-dimensional perspective. And we need to embrace the world for everything else that it has to offer. Why is it that our scientists say we only use like 10% of our brain? I've always pondered that. It's never made sense to me. What's the other 90% for? It can't just be for drinking. There's got to be something else going on there, something we're not tapping into. And I'm not trying to deny the existence of Source or God or Allah or anything like that. I'm just curious. It seems that there are those that walk among us from time to time that tap into that or have some sort of unbridled access to that at some point. Whether that's a musical interpretation or an artistic interpretation or intellectual interpretation. The Renaissance and the minds that ran around at that point in time are very fascinating to me, because what were they tapping into? So, I mean,
so what's your vision then? What's your vision for the next 12 months? What would you like to see?
I would like to see people stand up and demand their energy, and demand their energy of themselves. I want people to take responsibility for their own lives and say, no, if you don't have a contract with me, if you don't have standing with me, then go away. But I'd like to see people take, as above, so below. As below, so above. So if you're going to make demands of these people, stop downloading music illegally. That's not cool. You can't get upset at the bankers for, stealing your labor, and then you turn around and download whoever, Beyonce or whoever you're, stealing from, just because it's there. Like, you have to be in honor, right? So everyone rants and raves in this country about Wall Street and how corrupt Wall Street is. It says Wall Street isn't any more corrupt than Main Street. It's a reflection thereof. So when you're ready to clean up your street, Wall Street will magically clean itself up, because it's a reflection of you. You may not like hearing that, but that's the way it is. It's not rocket science. If you want people to act in honor towards you, look at your life and act in honor in all capacities of yours. One of the things that I'm really intrigued with is, ever since we went from basically an agrarian society to an industrial, there's been this tremendous focus on society's responsibility to the individual. So you have a 40-hour work week, and like, kids aren't supposed to work, and all of these things. And those have been, fantastic, right? Unions for a long time were really great institutions that were very much a needed part of our society. What I'd really like to see happen is, I'd like to have the discussion of what is the individual's responsibility back to society. And I think as we embrace our responsibility back to society, and each of us ponder that and then take action on what we uncover, society automatically starts to repair itself.
When you talk like this, and okay, it sounds like it's easy for, say, people in the Western world, Australia included,
Sure.
The US, who
Right.
are privy to this information,
Sure.
to do that, to start
Right.
standing up, to start taking
Sure.
back their power.
Yep.
But how do you tell that 12-year-old girl in the streets of Bangladesh, or
It's a great question.
that 8-year-old kid who's an orphan living on the dumps in
Right.
India?
Sure. Or Africa, where we've been raping and pillaging the continent for, I don't know, since what, 1860 or 17, whatever you want to, when we started buying slaves out of there.
Yeah.
I would say that as you fix the problems that are creating that, which are essentially Western problems, then those problems will clean themselves up. It's cause and effect. We have to clean up our house first. We have to. And the problem has always been, we're going to focus all of our energy on starving kids in Bangladesh or in Africa, which is fantastic. Meanwhile, we have this enormous amount of corruption going on in our backyard that's really causing the poor kid in Bangladesh to starve in the first place. I mean, why is Africa a war-torn continent to begin with? Well, it's because we won't stop meddling around over there.
That's true.
Right? So what would happen to Africa if we just stopped meddling around? I mean, my God, what would happen in the Middle East if we stopped meddling around? I mean, those people lived for a long time without trying to kill each other until we decided to go meddle around. So maybe we should stop meddling. Maybe we should concentrate on taking care of ourselves. And that's kind of how I see it. Like, it really comes down to, the way that I see things is if we all agree to take care of our own self in all aspects, from education to health to taking care of our neighbor, suddenly all these problems would just go away because they can't manifest anymore. And I know that sounds simplistic, but I tried to write the provisional patents on modeling healthcare costs after the same model that driver's license or driving insurance is registered or issued. So risk analysis and all this. And when I did that, I found that something like 70 or 80% of all healthcare issues can be done away with preventative maintenance.
Yeah.
You know, like going for a walk. I'm not talking about going to the gym or having a trainer. I'm talking about going for a walk an hour a day, an hour 3 times a week. And I'm not a doctor, so I might be stepping on toes, and I don't mean to if I am. Point is that if 80% or 70% of all health issues can be dealt with by taking a walk for 3 hours a week, and people are unwilling to do that, how are we going to solve these greater issues? And people aren't even willing to take care of themselves. In America, we have an obesity rate of something like 50%. It's embarrassing. It's horrible.
I believe Australia overtook you on that one.
Okay, I'm not going to argue.
I don't really want first prize on that one, but yeah, I believe we did.
Well, you see what I'm driving at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? If we fix the problems in our backyards, and those problems start with us, with you and I, like look at our own lives and say, how do we make our lives better? How do we have people talk about a higher frequency or whatever it is. You know, these things will iron themselves out. I mean, to me, the biggest fallacy is, I'm going to go do this great work over here. And we don't do the great work in our own existence. And we don't become that example for our niece and nephew and brother and sister and whoever is in your circle. And that's what you should do. I think. I mean, I'm a big believer that if the individual reaches into their power source that they all have and fixes themselves, which we can all do, you know, if we take that step, then society will get drug along because society is a representation of its members.
The man in the mirror, huh?
Right. And I know we don't like to talk about that because that means we can't just vote someone into office or can't just shovel a bunch of money into a new park or some program at school. We have to actually take action. But I'll tell you, you know, there's nothing like being healthy because I used to work all the time and, you know, going up a flight of stairs, I'd get out of breath. And then I decided that I didn't want to be that way, and I got healthy, and I love it. It's fantastic. You know? I switched my diet to primarily a vegetarian-based diet and make a carrot juice every day. It's fantastic. And I'm a lot more effective as a person, as an individual. And I think if we all did that, we'd see massive changes. But I'm very intrigued with the idea of the individual standing up and saying, okay, as an individual in this society, what is my obligation to it? You know, is it to be healthy? Is it to be intelligent? Is it to be constantly learning? Is it to be providing jobs? Is it to be, you know, picking up trash in my neighborhood when I walk down the street? Because I used to not do that. I used to think, I pay someone to do that, so I wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. And then I began to realize even if I do pay someone to do that, that's a terrible excuse for not taking a tenth of a second and grabbing a piece of trash and throwing it in a trash can. So look past the corruption of your local government for not picking up the trash and go pick it up yourself. You know, rain gutters are a favorite of mine because every once in a while it rains a lot out here. And how about you just get a rake, put on your boots, go over the rain gutter, and clean it off so you don't have a pond in your road. Like, it's not hard, you know, but we have to change our mentality. We have to change our thinking to think, what is my responsibility in this situation?
Well, a sense of self-responsibility has been stripped from us from a very young age for the most people.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
And with that goes self-governance and everything else.
Yes, I absolutely agree. But we have to, in my opinion, you know, this is kind of how I see things. In my opinion, we have to get back to embracing that. And we have to get back to saying, okay, even though maybe I don't have a contract with Jim to pick up the trash in his front yard when I walk past his house on my way to, you know, buy a banana, I'm still going to do it because Jim's part of my community And it certainly doesn't offend Jim by me picking up the trash in front of his house, unless that's his art project or something. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
But
I mean, especially when you do have kids, you see it all the time. They will step over something in their way. Because
right.
teenagers are in a world of their own, and they just don't see the mess around them, because it's somebody else's job to fix it. It's mum's job, basically.
Right.
And trying to get them to actually even just see it, just notice it, is an effort in itself. And then to go to that next step and say, okay, well, clearly there's a job there that needs doing. Now,
Right.
do I sit there and look at it for 3 days, waiting for somebody else to do it? Or can I just do it? I mean, there's no boundaries here. There's no yes or no, you can or can't. It's just there waiting to be done by somebody. Why not you?
Right. And a lot of these things aren't huge things to do. They're really not.
Of course not, no.
But we get caught up in our sense of whatever and don't do them. Like, I used to really hate unloading the dishwasher for some reason, and I actually timed how long it took to unload. And then after that, I just unloaded it. Because I went through all these consternation and being miserable over the 45 seconds it takes me to unload my dishwasher once every 2 weeks. It's true.
I thought you were going to say it at least took you 2 minutes, but okay, 45 seconds.
Well, I try to eat as little as possible, so.
Well, thank you, Caleb. It's been an interesting chat, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, I hope it helps. I mean, I don't pretend to be anybody's prophet, Like, I'm here because I want my kids to grow up to be free, and that's very important to me. Mm. And I'm assuming that there's a lot of other people that also want their kids to grow up to be free and want to be free themselves.
There's a lot of people who are just waking up to the fact that they're not free.
Yeah.
And they don't like it.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's okay. We can sit around and point fingers, or we can just give everyone a big hug and say, think of it this way, and then just get on down the road. And I hope that we can all just get on down the road. I mean, Rodney King, he was a guy in this country that got brutalized in LA by some cops. And he used to say, can't we just all get along? And when I was younger, I used to kind of make fun of him. And now that I'm a little older, I think to myself, can't we just all get along? Like, there's some wisdom there.
But, I mean, essentially, paperwork-wise, what the One People's Public Trust has done that. And now it's a matter of everybody realising it and embodying it and living in it.
Right, exactly. It really is. And no one wants war. No one wants any death. No one wants any famine or disease or mass starvation or nuclear bombs or hurricanes or tidal waves. We all need to come together, and we all need to say, we as members of society are going to go this way. And society will have no choice but to go that way. Because it's a reflection of us.
It is.
No one can enslave it without its consent. And go study Rome and the slave revolutions that happened in that period, and you'll understand what I mean. We get ourselves subjugated, and we forget who we are. And we need to stop that.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's nice just to chat. And I hope it's been helpful